It's lesson 7.4. We are expanding the Aztec Empire. How did the Aztec worldview influence the way people interacted with other cultures? We'll be learning all about that and more. So stick around and let's learn something. This is lesson 7.4, and the question we are about to answer is: how did the Aztec worldview influence the way that people interacted with other cultures? So this section is all about expanding their empire, expanding the Aztec empire. And a couple of things that we know when we are trying to expand empires: you can't do this simply by brute force and by going to war and conflict. You do need to expand with trading with your neighbors. And by trading with your neighbors, you can form certain alliances. Now, this is what the Aztecs were doing. They were forming alliances by trading with their neighbors, trading and forming alliances with those neighbors who are strong. Not stronger than the Aztecs, but still groups that are strong. The weaker neighbors that they had, well, obviously they weren't forming alliances with them. They were only doing it with the really strong groups. And the reason that they needed to trade was because of where Tenochtitlan was situated. Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, is 2,000 meters above sea level. So in order to get all of the foods and all of the birds that the Aztecs desired, what they needed to do was trade with people who were along the coast. And we can do this in a couple of ways. Number one, you can do this by conquering these people, or you can do this by aligning yourselves with these people and making trade partners. And if you were a trader or a warrior within the Aztec culture, there was a great pride in those two positions, the trader and the warrior. And the merchants, the traders, they traveled with hundreds of slaves with them. And we'll talk a little bit later in the next chapter how Aztecs viewed slavery. And they used slavery for doing the hard work. So in the case of the merchants, they used slaves to carry these goods. And merchants would be gone for extended periods of time. They don't have ships. Everything that they're doing is by foot. They're walking. So it's going to take months. And traders during the Aztecs, these merchants, they were trained as well as spies so that they could create maps, and then they could report back to the generals of the army, back to Montezuma, and they can explain what the situation outside of the Aztec Empire is looking like. So when it's time to go and take over a group of people, the army, the Aztec army, has the knowledge from these merchants who are making these maps and providing these reports. And they use these so that they can expand. And the Aztecs, they believed that it was their God-given right that they conquer all of the people in the universe. Now, the universe at the time, they didn't really understand and comprehend how large the universe actually was. But regardless of that, they believed that they were to conquer all of the people around. And that made them the largest empire in North America. And they truly believed that the Aztec society was way more important than the actual individual. So much so that every single Aztec citizen was prepared to offer themselves up for sacrifice for the greater good of the group. This started at an early age, and they say that a baby boy grew up with a bow and a shield. If you were an Aztec boy, you were given a bow and a shield, which means pretty much you were ready for war. And all Aztec boys, all Aztec males had to go into the military. It was compulsory. You had to go at a certain age. You were required to go. And off you went. You received your military training, you shadowed a soldier, and then you yourself at one point will go into the military. A coward was the absolute worst thing you could say to somebody who was of the Aztec Empire, and they worked hard to ensure that they themselves were not cowards. Now let's go back quickly to the trade and the conquering of other nations and other neighbors and other people in and around the Aztec Empire. What the Aztecs did is, from their trading partners, and more so from the people that they conquered, they collected something called tribute. This is kind of like a tax. So these conquered groups, they had to provide the Aztecs with cotton, they had to provide them with feathers, cocoa, jewels, all of these types of things that you would not find in and around Tenochtitlan. They required all of their conquered groups of people to pay tribute to the Aztecs in the form of things that were mentioned here. All right, head over to your notebook and complete the questions for this part of the chapter.